We good? All right. I flew in from Chicago earlier this morning where I gave a game jam yesterday for college students and high school students because it's one of the things I do at I Thrive, the organization I work for. We are seeking to scientifically prove the connection between positive psychology and game design. So I throw these positive psychology game jams, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone about those later.
Sorry, Heidi, I don't know which slides are yours. I didn't
That
put them
one
up.
right there.
Oh, okay. The one that says Heidi. That makes sense. Yeah. Woohoo.
This is a version of a talk that I gave at GDC, at the Narrative Summit in 2016, called "Don't Fear the Queer Audiences Are Ready." Basically, what I'm doing here is building a business case, right? I don't have to tell anyone in this room that we want more queer content in games, right? We all know this to our very bones. But when you are a designer trying to make a case to the higher-ups about why it's a good idea to include this stuff,
Hold it higher up.
yeah, we need to, I don't know, it just kind of went out or something. All right. But basically, my goal here is to give folks some ammunition that you can talk about, some statistics and ammunition that will help you build a case for why this is important. So I am using queer for purposes of this talk as an umbrella term for anyone who's not cis and het, just so you know. I've done a number of talks all over the world about romance in games. I've been studying this since 2011. Here is a list of talks I gave and places where I was published about my first romance in games survey. But I'm going to focus this talk on the second group of data and what led me to my second group of data, right? In my second group, I found that there were 57% queer respondents, 83% born after 1980, 83% of people were out, 54% male, 38% female, 8% non-binary, and there wasn't any significant difference across geographical locations because I had respondents from all over the world. But in the survey, there was one statistic that stood out to me a lot, which made me want to go back and figure out just what's going on here, and that is 25% of the female respondents said they were bisexual. And the Pew Research data and also the 2010 U.S. Census both found that only 10% of the population identifies as LGBT. So what that said to me was, shoot, does this mean that we have a higher percentage of queer people who are playing games than we do in the general population? And let's figure that out. Let's unpack that, because if it's true, that's a market.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the second survey I published in QED in June of 2015, and again in Diversifying Barbie in Mortal Kombat, which was published last summer. I asked, what makes a good game romance? Why might game romances not be satisfying, and what is the role of romance in games? This was what I asked in the second survey, and I found one really interesting thing, right? When I asked, what does game romance mean to you? The queer answers were all very angry. They were all angry, very good percentage of them were angry. So I'd offered people the opportunity to give open-ended answers to these questions. So I started reading them, like really reading them, to see why people were angry. And the reason people are angry, surprise, we at least want the option to play as our actual sexual orientation. Imagine that. I asked people, I said, can you please name any queer character that you've encountered in a video game? And the queer respondent said, Zevran Arianai. The straight respondent was like, yeah, that flamboyant elf dude in Dragon Age 2. And what I found was that the queer respondents almost always were able to name the first and the last name of the character. The straight people were just like, yeah, okay, maybe that dude. And what that means is that the queer people, that they made an impression. These characters made an impression. They matter to us. We were so happy to see a character that was anything like us, that it made an impression on us, and it made us want to remember their names. And, Dragon Age is coming up on 10 years old now, Dragon Age Origins, and people are still remembering, the first and last name of a video game character, the secondary video game character that they played almost 10 years ago. So one thing that I asked was, how do you feel about romance content in games for sexual orientation that's not your own? And that was an open-ended question. People could answer however they wanted to, and I had to figure out a way to categorize this. So here's how I did it. Anybody who said things like great, awesome, enthusiastic, I put them in as supportive. Anyone who I put in as mildly supportive said things like cool, good, interesting, no problem. Neutral was kind of okay, indifferent, don't care, doesn't matter, phrases like that. Negative, those responses used words like bad, uncomfortable, no, shouldn't, or gross. And so when I asked people, how do you feel about content that's different from your own sexual orientation, how many queer people do you suppose had a problem with the fact that there's straight romance content in games? 0. Now here was the part that was the standout statistic to me, and it just really touched me right down to my soul. And that was the fact that 55% of the straight players said, yes, let them have this. And that's powerful. That is powerful, and I think it's new. I think it's something that we have not seen before, was that a majority of the straight people are on our side with this right now. But I realized that my data is very limited because I only had 1,500 respondents to my survey. So I decided to ask my friend Nick Yee, who runs Quantic Foundry. Nick Yee has a sample size of over 250,000 gamers. And he collects data not on sexual orientation, but on gender. He asks people for their gender and says, are you male, female, or other? And I'm including other in the category of queer. So I asked Nick, I was like, can you run me a report, please, on the player motivation profiles of the queer gamers? And he said, sure. So now what Nick does is he has this survey online at Quantic Foundry, which you can take, and it will tell you, here are the types of player motivations, and it will tell you what you are motivated by as a player when you're playing a game. And it's really a pretty interesting survey. I encourage people to take it if they haven't. But these are the motivations that Nick came up with. And he ran the report on the queer respondents, and they were pretty much all very concentrated into design, discovery, fantasy, and story as their player motivations. And that fits into the categories of immersion and creativity, according to Nick's data. Now, when you look at what the games are that fit under those titles, how about that? You get Dragon Age, Mass Effect, Elder Scrolls, Knights of the Old Republic, Skyrim, and my data said that the top 5 game franchises remembered for queer characters were Mass Effect, Dragon Age, Elder Scrolls, Fable. They're the same, right? My survey had 1,500 responses. He had 250,000, and they ended up saying the same thing. So imagine this. Queer people are enjoying games with us in them. Eureka! We have seen some really masterful work in recent years in games like Gone Home and Life is Strange. And I hope that we continue to see many more independent games that take up queer topics in ways that are relatable, that people who are straight can play and begin to understand our experiences a little bit better. But I'm sure you noticed a couple slides earlier that there was one company that was figuring pretty prominently, and that's BioWare. And, I only really put up this slide because I wanted Alistair really big, and there he is. But no, BioWare has got to be a central part of this conversation, right? Because they're the ones that the queer people are calling out as the people who are designing games that have characters that relate most to us. I am not going to stand up here and pretend that their representations are not sometimes problematic. I've not played the new Mass Effect Andromeda, for instance, so I can't say for sure. It is? Okay, well that's good, but I've also, oh yeah, of course. No, I've read some things to suggest that they may have taken a step backwards towards trans representation this time, and that really concerns me a lot. But I want to say that up until Mass Effect Andromeda, they had a pretty interesting evolution. They had straight romance only until they decided to test the waters by putting a bisexual character named Juhani into Knights of the Old Republic. And then after that, in their very next set of games, Jade Empire, Mass Effect, the original Dragon Ages, they had homosexual female, homosexual male, straight female, and straight male options, which was new, and it was more expanded. So what they've been doing with every game that they've done is to test the waters and go a little bit further, and then they test the waters and then they go a little bit further. Most romance options were bisexual in Dragon Age 2, and I kind of didn't like that, but they fixed it whenever Dragon Age Inquisition came out. They fixed it by having all of the companion characters who were romanceable. They all had their very own sexual identities for you to discover. And that's pretty much how it is in real life, and that's why I really appreciated that. What they did is they added Sarah, who was a fully lesbian character. They added Dorian, who was the most beautiful gay man. He was a tease, though. If you play as a girl, God, is he a tease. Unfortunate. You don't even get to see his butt. And then you have Krem, which was a secondary character that if you took the time to get to know Krem, you realize that Krem is a trans character, and they handled it beautifully. The character was voiced by Jennifer Hale, who did FemShep, and people were, the response to Krem was actually pretty positive. And then they turned around and they did this thing in Mass Effect Andromeda, so I wonder how that's going to go. But BioWare is the overarching company that is part of any conversation about romance in games and queerness in games. And Dragon Age Inquisition, they sold 4.5 million copies. And so if you're going to tell me that, oh, put queer characters in a game, nobody will buy the game, well, these 4.5 million people are going to disagree with you. And then you have the indie game festivals and the conferences. Like you've got GamerX, you've got Indiecade that are starting to have a presence. You have the Everyone Games tent at Indiecade, and you have a whole festival that's GamerX, geared to this stuff. And people show up, and they are happy, and they are thrilled, and it's a celebration, and it's wonderful. Now, if you look at other mediums, which you should, I mean, we've already talked about games, but let's look at TV. On TV, GLAAD reports that the number of LGBTQ characters, it's going up. You had Laverne Cox and Mia Taylor and Transparent all winning Emmy Awards and Golden Globe Awards for the content that they gave on TV. And then this year, how about this year, during the Oscars, Moonlight won Best Picture, and I gotta say, for about 5 minutes there watching the Oscars, I got stabby, but Moonlight won. And I'm happy about that. And while you're looking at movies, let's look at some of the bigger franchises that are starting to get with the program. Now, I'm not so sure about Finn and Poe, but God, I'm gonna ship it. And the other one was not, I don't know that the other one was exclusively called out, but it read that way to me. And all my other queer friends, we all got it. It read that way to us, but a lot of my straight friends are like, oh wow, that would make the whole relationship between them incredibly different. You think? So then you ask Stan Lee, well, what do you think about this? You're the guy who owns one of the biggest science fiction franchises ever, before he sold it to Disney. But Stan Lee, you ask Stan Lee, what do you think about gay characters? And I don't care what happens as long as they tell good stories, and they do. So you got Uncle Stan on board with this. And another science fiction person, the late amazing Leonard Nimoy, said it's entirely fitting that gays and lesbians will appear unobtrusively aboard the Enterprise, neither objects of pity nor melodramatic attention. So the media is starting to reflect more, and video games are a medium, and so there's no reason why we shouldn't be rolling along with what the other mediums are doing. Now, if you look at socially, there's a growing support for same-sex marriage, particularly among millennials, where you now have a majority who is on our side with this socially. You also have shades of bisexuality by age. British adults were asked to place themselves on the Kinsey scale ranging from 0, which is completely heterosexual, to 6, which is completely homosexual. And you notice that there are a lot more self-identifying bisexual people now than have been comfortable identifying that way before. And I think it's fantastic. So I guess what I'm saying here, what I'm taking all of this information from all these different places together to say, don't fear the queer, right? Don't fear the queer. Audiences are ready for it. Romance is important to queer players. We want more and better representation in our romance content, and guess what? The straight players don't mind anymore. That seems to be the one thing that trips people up. Oh, we're going to get criticized, or people are not going to buy our game. I just showed 2 pretty good data points suggesting that that's just not true. And quite honestly, I think now with politics the way they are, it's going to be even more important to push for this, because nobody's going to do it but us, and we need to. Again, Quantic Foundry's player motivation data. The overlap of the needs and motivations of queer players suggests a hell of a marketing opportunity, right? The market conditions are changing. With more acceptance comes less risk, and as Uncle Stan would say, with more power, more responsibility. The market is just changing. BioWare is making it work for them, and queer money is just as green. Cultural conditions are changing. Queer people have been underserved, but now that we have straight supporters who are still going to buy and play games with both sets of content in it, developers, you're leaving money on the table if you're not paying attention to this. Because you know how they said in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come? Same goes right here. So I encourage everybody, don't fear the queer, because you will be met with nothing but support from people all over the world who use games as a safe space to experiment with their identities and to be able to practice their identities free from social cost. It is important in so many ways and for so many reasons. And at this point in the talk, when I gave it at GDC, I had everybody in the room at GDC chanting, "Don't fear the queer." So we can do that if you want to, or if we're feeling tired at the end of the day, you don't have to, but the message remains the same. There are reasons why this matters, and there are reasons why developers do not have to be afraid to do this anymore. And so feel free to talk to me about the statistics I've collected if it's something that will help you sell it up the chain, because it's sellable. And just thank you. What's next for me? I've been studying romance and games, as I said, since 2011, and my goal at that time, I started out with this little bee in my bonnet, these questions that I just kind of wanted to explore and find out more about. And what that morphed into was wanting to start an industry conversation about this, because it seems like everywhere I go, people want to talk about romance and games. We just did our roundtable at GDC, and the room was completely full. People are excited about this topic. And I was like, I really hope that I can get the conversation going and keep the conversation going. So the next step in this conversation, at least for me, is that I'm working on a book right now called Digital Love, Romance and Sexuality in Games with Taylor Francis Publishers, and my manuscript is due to the publisher on April the 15th. And what we collected was essays from all over the world. We've got old, young, veteran developer, new developer, student, professional, male, female, queer, straight, and people from all over the world. So I'm really very proud of the authors that we've collected who've written some really great stuff about romance and games. So that's just letting everyone know to look for that and when. And that's what's driving me crazy these days. But that's how I'm hoping to continue this work. So there is my contact information if anyone wants to talk with me further about any of this or about the stuff that I work at iThrive on. And just thank you. Thank you folks for letting me come here and talk to you today. I respect all of you as people and as gamers and as developers who are going to help me change this for us. So thank you all.
Thanks.